it's been 2 days, really 3 days of hell for me. Just been working like crazy. I have a lot of my own little phrases that I came up with. Like to insult a fool is the praise of wisdom. Nothing true is popular. Nothing popular is true. Yeah? Here's my newest one. I have a lot of them, by the way, actually. My newest one is this. To forgive is divine, but to forget is satanic. That's pretty good, huh? That's way more accurate. You can forgive somebody, and that's divine. But to ever forget is really the heart of evil. I'm really, really good, that's not my opinion, even though it's true, at translating languages and be able to see and read between the lines on a lot of stuff. College professors said I was a before never seen prodigy on translating languages. Really, really good. The Russians said I was absolutely без акцентов, absolutely without accent. Really good on languages. Also, too, this same skill is really good for field theory. I'd like to talk about the ether and read a passage from Tesla's from an interview of Tesla and actually talk about what he's actually saying. He's actually talking about scalar and also, too, on the ether. I understand and see fields with complete simplicity, and that's exactly how Mother Nature intends it. And before starting out on reading this, I've had a lot of people over the years and discussing the aether. So the ether doesn't exist, it's all particles, culture-bumping particles, bent space-time, and of course I've talked about that endlessly. But the people that say this are extremely unintelligent, and it's no different than talking about the soul and discussing certain translations of ancient metaphysics. And there's 1,000 ideas of the soul. The actual Jains think that the soul is atomistic, in other words, a material entity inside of a living being, which of course is just completely ridiculous. The same is true of the ether. Even during the times of the ancient Greeks, the atomists, atomism was disproven by the Pythagoreans and the Platonists and the Neo-Pythagoreans and the Neoplatonists. These are all the silly words that we came up with rather recently. But they had a million different ideas on the ether back then too. So when someone says, the ether was disproven, Michelson Morley experiment, blah, blah, this doesn't mean anything. There's a million different theories on the nature of the divine. Some people think that the divine is an old dude, with a beard, sitting on a rocking chair up in the sky. Of course, completely ridiculous. People feel free to believe whatever they want. The same is true of the ether. Just because certain ideas, and of which there are countless about the ether, have been disproven, this in no way discounts the ether. And this is one of the fundamental fallacies of humanity, especially on really, really important subjects like the ether, the absolute, and you can put God in with that, ether to the absolute, the soul. There's a million different ideas and concepts about it. So just because you've, attacked one successfully, one version thereof, doesn't mean you've actually defeated it. And it's really important. And I'd like to read on this and expound on it, make things really, really clear. At least I hope to, in very simple terms on what Nikola Tesla is talking about. The fascination with electromagnetic theory of light advanced by Maxwell and subsequently experimentally investigated by Hertz was so great that even now, and these are false ideas of the ether, even though James Clerk Maxwell was genius, was so great that even now, although controverted, the scientific minds are under its sway. This theory supposed the existence of a medium which was solid. It permitted bodies to pass through it without resistance. Tenuous beyond conception, in other words, hocus, nonsense. Nonsense theory about the ether. And yet, according to our conceptions of mechanical principles and ages of experience, such a medium was absolutely impossible. Nevertheless, light was considered essentially a phenomena bound up in that kind of medium, i.e. the ether. However, a wrong idea about the ether, namely one capable of transmitting transverse vibrations like a solid. And by the way, Tesla is talking about light here. I've quoted one section of this little thing that I'm about to continue on quoting you here about light being a sound wave in the ether, but this is about the ether. I will point out to you Tesla's discoveries and how he actually unfolded and built things in his mind is based upon his understanding of light. By the way, I will point out to you who I'm completely against 100% because they reified space and time as things which are not things at all. Time is only a measure, and space has no properties. That's the one thing Nikola Tesla foams at the mouth about over and over again. This is the only thing I've ever known or read from Tesla where he foams at the mouth. Not literally, but this idea that space has properties. Quantum and relativity, which is really one thing with two different names. By their own admission, not me saying it, their own admission, all of quantum is based upon our understanding of what light is and how it works. Nikola Tesla is the same way, and he's worked his way back, and this, of course, is retroduction, building things in his mind, systems about what is light. The ancient Greeks were the same way, like, what is light? It's certainly not a particle, it's not a wave, it's not an emission. Nothing emits light, nothing emits sound either. However, we have a speed of sound. All humanity has caught up the idea of something with speed as an emission and something is moving from point A to point B. However, sound's a disturbance of the medium, in this case being oxygen and nitrogen, obviously and logically so. So Nikola Tesla works his way back into his conception of the ether, which lines up with someone specific I'll talk about here directly, as Nikola Tesla talks about him. And this is Tesla's principle of the ether, from which he derives many explanations, including wireless power transmission, i.e. scalar energy. And I'll talk about scalar energy vis-a-vis Tesla here very quickly as soon as I read through this. Won't take us a second. It's true, Mr. Tesla said, that many scientific minds envisaged the theory of a gaseous ether, but it was rejected again and again because in such a medium, longitudinal waves, he actually means rarefactions and compressions, but he says longitudinal waves. Scalar doesn't have any wave component. It's actually rarefaction and compression. Longitudinal waves would propagate with infinite velocity. Well, in some cases they do, and this, of course, is where we get instantaneous action at a distance. But Nikola Tesla, at this point in time, when he gives this quote, is apparently not understanding or has thought about instantaneous action at a distance, which we know is true. Like in the EPR paradox, there are many examples of this. Lord Kelvin conceived of the so-called contractile ether, i.e. an elastic ether. In 1885, however, an academic dissertation was published by Professor de Volsen-Wood. In other words, and I'm going to read on to this, Tesla's idea of the ether, or his vision of a true ether, an accurate one, that models how the universe really works and how the actual ether works, is based partially or greatly upon Professor de Volsen-Wood, an American at Hoboken Institute, which dealt with a gaseous ether in which elasticity, density, and specific heat were determined with rare academic elegance. In other words, he loves it. But so far, everything pertaining to the subject was purely theoretical. What then can light be if not a transverse vibration? This was the question asked and set out to find the answer. I consider this extremely important, said Mr. Tesla in this interview he's giving. Light can be nothing else but a longitudinal disturbance in the ether involving alternate compressions and rarefactions. Now, light is a coaxial circuit. Light actually has two components. But as I said, magnetism is just a dielectric field, just like saying ice is the field of water under a given temperature, and I'll explain this and break this up where Tesla's talking about the ether here very quickly, and I've actually talked about this before more than a few times. Light, then longitudinal ether. In other words, that the transverse components, as I've said before in many different videos, are only occasioning the longitudinal disturbance when rarefied. In other words, when light is under rarefaction, not under compression, once under rarefaction, the transverse electromagnetic with a given frequency, i.e. set wavelength, manifest. In other words, light is that longitudinal disturbance in the ether, as Nikola Tesla is talking about, but the coaxial circuit that makes up the totality of light occurs when the loss of energy or inertia of the dielectric along the longitudinal is rarefied, the opposite of compressed, rarefied, manifests the transverse electrical component that we call in totality light. The idea of a photon is the compression of light along the longitudinal circuit of light that Tesla is talking about. When we actually have the transverse electrical magnetic components, this is the manifestation of that rarefaction along the longitudinal disturbance of the ether. So Nikola Tesla is right. Light is nothing other than a longitudinal disturbance of the ether. I shouldn't say in the ether, then you think light is something in the ether, rather than an ether modality itself, because all fields, as I've said a million times, are nothing other than ether perturbation modalities, in this case an ether rarefaction and compression modality, i.e. a longitudinal disturbance of the ether. And people don't understand this. Remember, magnetism is just a dielectric field, just as ice is the field of water. Ice is not different than water. It's like, well, we have water here, and we have the transverse ice over here. I'm making it simple for people to understand. You know, they're not two different things. In other words, when water is under a certain disturbance, i.e. cold, will manifest ice. Well, when the longitudinal circuit that is light, as Nikola Tesla accurately tells you, when it is rarefied, we have the transverse electromagnetic components at a given frequency, and the frequency tells you the capacitance. If it is low frequency, it's low capacitance. It is ultra high frequency, it's extremely high capacitance, because the smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. So in other words, like I said, the transverse components is the rarefaction of the ether. The energy, of course, is dissipated and as the transverse components that we call this coaxial circuit of light. So getting back to Tesla again, light can be nothing other than a longitudinal disturbance. He says in the ether, but what he means is of the ether. Where it's very important, because when you say in the ether, you think something is in the ether, the light itself. Rather, the light itself is of the ether. It's an ether perturbation modality, specifically a compound one. However, in simplex, Tesla, of course, is right. It's a longitudinal disturbance of the ether, involving alternate rarefactions and compressions. And this, of course, the central or coaxial center conductor in the case. I don't know if you know what a cross-section of a coax cable is. You can find a million images on Google search. In other words, light can be nothing else other than a sound wave in the ether. Because sound is not an emission, it doesn't have a speed, it's a disturbance of the medium. And he's talking about the elasticity and density of the ether of his person that he cleaves to as having the accurate model of the ether. Remember, there's been a million models of the ether throughout thousands of years. There's been a million ideas about God and the absolute. There's been a million ideas about the soul. Something that's atomistic and it's inside the heart, which is completely ridiculous and quite poetic, but metaphysically and logically absurd, nonsense, just ridiculous. You know, you sooner find a soul inside of a person than you would find a signal inside of a radio, and there ain't no fireplace inside this iMac here, right? We see it, but it's not in there, right? It's a signal. It's the consubstantiality and the manifestation of both working in coordination, which of course is life. You know, the consubstantiality of matter and spirit. Anyway, getting back to Tesla and his vision of the ether, which is accurate, but based mostly upon Professor de Volson-Wood. It appears clearly, Mr. Tesla explains, it is first realized that there being no Maxwellian ether, which is a rejection of the Maxwellian ether. Not a rejection of the ether, but the rejection of Maxwellian ether. There could be no transverse oscillation in the medium. The Newtonian theory he believes is an error because it falls, because Sir Isaac Newton had his own ideas about the ether, also in error. In error because it fails entirely in not being able to explain how a small candle can project particles with the same speed as the blazing sun. This is not Tesla talking, but rather this person doesn't understand light's not a particle, but even back then they thought light was a particle, which of course is completely ridiculous. An immensely higher temperature. In other words, the sun and a candle are producing light, which is emitting light at the same speed, which they both are, but they're not an emission, of course. And the speed is actually not a speed at all, rather hysteresis, or, of course, the rate of induction. The hysteresis, the rate of induction at which the elasticity occurs, no different than the so-called speed of sound. The speed of sound, and of course the speed of sound actually changes, which is not a speed at all, rather hysteresis, and also, too, rate of induction. Changes depending on the temperature and density of the air. But this speed of sound, just like the so-called speed of light, is the elasticity vector, which is actually c, of the medium, whether that be the air or whether that be the ether. We have made sure by experiments, said Nikola Tesla, that light propagates with the same velocity irrespective of the character of the source. Such consistency of velocity can only be explained by assuming that it depends solely upon the physical properties of the medium. Accurate statement. This is the only way a candle and the sun produce this entity we call light. With the, one is infinitely not powerful and the other one is infinitely powerful. In other words, it has nothing to do with the source. It has to do with the nature of the medium. This is, Nikola Tesla is actually using retroduction. Same as his superhero. That famous photo of Tesla with one hand on the book And the other hand on his head, that book he's got his hand on is Roger Boskiewicz's Theoria Philosophiae Naturalis, Theory of Natural Philosophy, a free download on archive.org. You can find it. Half the page is Latin, the other half is translated in English. We've made sure by experiments that it propagates the same velocity irrespective of the character. Microwave coming new wireless waves. It is still true that they are the same character as light waves, only they are not transversal but longitudinal. He's talking about scalar energy. Nikola Tesla is using retroduction and starting out with light. And what is the nature of light? It's not an emission, it's not a speed, it's actually a property of the medium. Same character, wireless wave. As a matter of fact, radio transmitters emit nothing else but sound waves in the ether. Still not an emission. He's talking about a disturbance in the medium. And if the experts would realize this, they would find it much easier to explain the curious observations made in the applications of these waves, i.e. radio or light, doesn't make any difference. Light, radio, gamma, it's all the same thing. EMF, i.e. the coaxial circuit of light, whether it be visible light or radio or gamma, makes no difference. Infrared, ultraviolet. It being the fact that radio waves are essentially like sound waves in the air, it is evident that the shorter the waves, i.e. high frequency, the more penetrative they would be. That's because they're higher capacitance at shorter waves. In 1899, I produced electromagnetic waves from 1 to 2 millimeters long and observed their action at a distance. There have been great hope expressed by various workers that the introduction of these wave phenomena will have a revolutionary effect. But I am not sharing this opinion as yet. They will be used, of course, to a very limited extent. Manifest the applications thereof. Let me read on the last part and get... We have made sure by experiments that Mr. Tesla that light propagates with the same... Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I read a little bit of the same section there. Tell you about microwave possibilities and wireless transmission. Come now to wireless waves. It's still true that they're of the same character as light waves, only they're not transversal, rather longitudinal. Oh yeah, actually I was reading the same thing. I'm so sorry about that. I'll edit this out. I meant to read the paragraph down here from Tesla. Here again, Mr. Tesla, we have a strange misconception of the experts, a grievous errors, collection of grievous errors, for retarding the idea. He believes that when it is accomplished, the power will travel on long waves, i.e. longitudinal, i.e. scalar. And he said he could vouch the same scheme of wireless power transmission is entirely practical. The application of shortwave for power purposes, said Mr. Tesla, involves complicated, expensive apparatus for rectification of frequency transformation, which make any serious attempt to carry out a project of this kind infinitely more difficult from an economical point of view. So this is the actual basis of the ether of Nikola Tesla, talking about elasticity of the medium, which is the rate of induction of hysteresis, or what ignorant human beings call the speed of the disturbance, i.e. in this case light. No different than sound. Sound is not an emission. When somebody speaks, they're not emitting anything. Conventionally, of course, yeah, we're emitting sound, but no, we're not emitting anything. We're creating a disturbance of the medium, in this case the air. Nikola Tesla's idea about the ether is based entirely upon light, as are his opposites, and they are completely opposite to him, the people that have reified space and time, because when you're an atomist and you reject the ether, you actually have to build up something with another foundation. Another foundation is the cult of bumping particles, all of which go under two names but are one and the same thing, relativists and the cult of quantum. And these people are mathematicians. They're not actual scientists. They're not field theorists. He is against and opposed to these. Nikola Tesla is violently opposed, not literally violently opposed, to the principle of space having properties, folding space, bending space. We all grew up with this garbage in our science fiction shows and the nonsense of Einstein. Everything intelligent that we think came from Einstein. There have been 4 books, I think 5, written about this fact, attributed to Albert Einstein. No, they did not. They came stolen by Einstein and taken from Henri Poincaré. Yeah? There's several of his books that are a free download. So the actual and accurate model of the ether is based upon a simplex, gaseous model of the ether expounded by Professor de Volson-Wood. Talk about ether elasticity, and of course he talks about rare academic elegance, and this elasticity accurately, as opposed to Lord Kelvin, as opposed to the Maxwellian theory of the ether, because there are countless thousands of theories of the ether out there. Most of them are ridiculous, and absurd, just like the idea of an atomistic soul, like, literally. There are many people that actually, in groups of people that I won't name again, that believe that the soul is this atomistic entity residing in the heart. It's just ridiculous. Completely ridiculous, unintelligent, illogical. So when people actually go against the ether, they act ignorantly as if there's just this one monolithic model of the ether. And there's not. There's thousands. Primarily, there's about 20 that have existed to this time. But the rejection of all the countless ridiculousness around the ether is not a rejection of the ether itself. From this, Nikola Tesla was able to understand the nature of scalar. He understands that it is blatantly obvious, as he said, that you have a disturbance that is occurring at the same rate of induction from a candle as it is from the super powerful sun. Well, since they're both occurring at the same rate of induction, that tells you that there's a medium, because the candle would not create a disturbance if light were actually an emission with the speed and it were traveling. This photon idea, which is a conceptual brain fart dreamt up by atomists and mathematicians vis-a-vis relativity and quantum. Nikola Tesla bases everything and works his way back on the accurate theory as to the nature of light, as does relativity, as does quantum, as does the ancient Pythagoreans, as do the ancient Greek atomists. It all must be based upon light. And the fundamental thing Nikola Tesla said, that nobody on this earth, and I've read everything out there by Tesla and people commenting on Tesla, there's not a single one of them out there that will retroduct out and tell you what's really important when Nikola Tesla says light can be nothing else but a longitudinal disturbance in the ether. It's like, well, what about the transverse components? It can't be just longitudinal because it has transverse with a set frequency of wavelength, the electromagnetic nature of light. But that is the occasioning of the rarefaction of light, which manifests the transverse. Like when water is occasioned by cold, ice will manifest, right? Like, well, there's not water over here and ice over here. Ice is a property when water is cold, right? Well, when the rarefaction compression longitudinal nature of light, as Nikola Tesla tells you accurately, a longitudinal disturbance of the ether, when it is rarefied, it will manifest the transverse electromagnetic components. So we can say this is a part of light, or it is what happens when light rarefies. That is the correct answer. So this is the accurate model of the ether as expounded by Tesla. I don't know to what degree he based it upon Professor de Volson-Wood. Apparently greatly so. Not read the dissertations and writings of Dr. Volson-Wood much to make an extreme comment on that relative to how accurate Tesla adhered to it, but he certainly worked his way back from there. Nikola Tesla right here tells you he rejected the Maxwellian and Hertzian model of the ether. But that does not mean that Nikola Tesla rejected the ether. No way, no how. So I hope I presented this very simply to you. I think I did. If you ever want to contact me, my information is in the description below. Any donation is always warmly welcome. Lux e veritas. Nikola Tesla was a smart dude. He didn't know everything, but there's a lot of stuff that can be learned from Nikola Tesla. Do they teach you about Tesla in high school or college? Oh, no, they don't. They don't at all. They don't. That kind of tells you everything, doesn't it? Goodbye.